Thanks. I'll kick it straight in and talk a little bit about why I've chosen the crazy title that I have. So thanks for everyone for coming to why our organizational leadership is still pretty sucky. You can see that I've chosen a quite controversial title, and you can potentially blame Piotr for that. But I guess I do fundamentally believe that our organizational leadership has not moved on as much as our practices that we bring to the fore from Scrum and XP and many of the Agile games that we play. So what I've been doing over the last sort of 15 years of my own leadership thing is trying to figure out what is it that we can do to help leaders on a journey, and what should leaders be thinking about, and why are they not getting there. But to start the day, I really wanted to ask a quick question just to find out who's in what category in the audience, because we tend to get leaders in two primary categories. We get leaders who are line managers, and you are in staff management, if you will, and you're part of the hierarchical line management of an organization. And then we get leadership through what I think most Agile coaches are, as sort of an influencing leader, where your job is to change the effectiveness of a community, but you're not directly the line management responsibility for the staff. And then obviously we'll have people here who are individual contributors, and I think that leadership does exist in the interactions between everyone in an organization, but I just wanted to find out what of the three categories people fit into. So if you can go to polls, and maybe I can get that to start, and it's just should ask you, are you a line management type leader, an influence type leader, or an individual contributor, just so I can see the background that people are coming from. Can everyone find that poll? Just a couple more seconds, and then I'll end it. It's giving me a pretty good indication of the ratio in the background there. Okay, I'm going to end that now, but that's brilliant. So about 60% influence leaders. I'm assuming that's kind of the Agile coaching crews, and about just over 20% line management. So that's brilliant. I hope everyone's going to get something out of this presentation. So back to my slides. So a little bit about me. Just very, very quickly, I'm Doug Talbot. I would spent 10 years as a developer and software builder, and I spent the last 15 years in technology management, and the last sort of 1 or 2 years as part of an organizational dynamics consultancy, trying to help other leaders figure out all of the technology stuff and leadership things that I've discovered through my involvement with the Agile movement. And I'm going to tell the actual story of where I came through that, just to explain some of the pains that I was seeing and what I was doing to overcome them. So let's talk about my journey. I went on a journey, and for those 15 years, I found that I was not only trying to lead technology, but I was also trying to lead Agile transformations. I often got moved into organizations which really wanted Agile transformation. I got started in about 2005. But every time I went on one of these transformations, and almost every time without fail, I got blocked by organizational systems or structure that was getting in the way, or leaders beside me or above me who didn't understand what we were trying to tell or pass on as a message as part of the Agile movement. And so let's tell a little bit of the detail of that story. So first, I started with Scrum, and I imagine many of you started with Scrum, and many of you may still be optimizing your life in the Scrum space. And I was taken on as a manager as part of the Ministry of Social Development in New Zealand. I'm a New Zealander, and I had to build a tech team from scratch, and there was no software development lifecycle, no SDLC defined. So I needed to discover one, and luckily I bumped into a fantastic Scrum coach, Agile coach called Renee Troughton, and she was able to show me that there was this really fantastic SDLC out there that we could use that was much more researched, much more evidence-based, and getting fantastic results. And so we implemented Scrum into the Ministry of Social Development. It was actually the first Agile implementation in a government department in New Zealand. And we got fantastic results. We got great new feedback loops with our customers and between our developers and our customers, and we got faster requirement solicitation, because previously all of the requirements had been these massive documents, waterfall style, with third-party integrators who had to develop external to the organization and then dump the product into the company. And so we got lots of benefits. And I thought, fantastic, I've got all these wonderful new practices. And so a year or two in, I thought, I need to stretch my brain more, and I need to stretch the team's brain more, and we need to be even more productive. So let's bring in some extreme programming, and I added some extreme programming to stretch my brain some more and get better engineering practice. I thought, if we're even more productive, then this whole transformation is going to be even more successful. But weirdly enough, I started to get this kind of friction, and we started to get some sparks flying in the organization. And what I'd found was that actually this wasn't motivating the engineers. Many of these engineers had come from waterfall backgrounds, and actually they were a bit grumpy about the fact that they now had to go and talk to customers, and they had to work on collaboration, and they now had to do all this testing and this TDD from extreme programming that they didn't have to do before. And there was all these daily stand-ups and meetings that got in the way. And so I had unmotivated engineers starting to appear, and also the stakeholders, the kind of people who would have done the 5-year strategy plans, and the finance people who were normally doing the kind of CapEx, OpEx assignment of our work, were totally confused as to how they could interact with this extreme programming and Scrum model. And so actually, when I left, there was a huge amount of friction going on in the organization. And as I left and the energy went away, it dissipated. It was kind of a failed transformation. I moved into another organization, however, that was looking forward and trying to innovate in the Met service in New Zealand. And here I was the software development manager for the whole organization and had many teams. And I thought, if we get even more productive, and this time if I pay a little bit more attention to self-organization in the teams, maybe we can keep the teams happier, and maybe even more productive will make all of the finance people happier. And so we added in feature-driven development. I don't know how many of you will have heard of that, but invented by a guy called Jeff DeLuca, which is an early Agile kind of architecture model. And we added in lean metrics, and we got really into just-in-time pull systems. And I thought, this is going to be fantastic. But as time went on, actually, this just made the project managers and the marketing people and the finance people around us even more annoyed. And when I left the Met service after about 3 years there, even though we had an incredibly productive delivery team, the infrastructure and sales and marketing people were pretty grumpy and still hadn't quite managed to figure out what this was all about. All these leadership things that we were doing were failing. And it pretty much was abandoned straight after I left. So I may have contributed to another Agile transformation fail. So into the third organization, and here I joined a Bank of New Zealand, and I thought, and here I was heading more than 100 people in many Scrum teams, but the Scrum teams were in a bit of turmoil, and they were having wars with their managers when I arrived, and they brought me in to try and evolve the Agile transformation. And so we thought, oh, right, well, let's connect our teams with Lean Startup to our product owners, and let's make sure that there's a nice loop between our customer and our product owners and our teams. That'll smooth that piece out. Let's make sure that our operations and infrastructure group get hooked together with us, and let's create a bit of a DevOps interaction. We brought Dave Snowden in to talk with the people around us about complexity and why we were doing feedback loops and experimental stuff. And we brought in Dean Leffingwell, the inventor of SAFe, to try and talk to the entire leadership. And he spent a week with the leadership of the bank trying to explain why we were doing what we were doing. And we had amazing results. We had great product innovation, great delivery speed. And it was so successful that they then centralized what we were doing in this digital delivery group to the whole bank. And in that centralization, actually, the friction started again. Now we had hundreds of managers who were suddenly expected to understand what was going on in this little group of 100, 150 people. And they didn't like it. It didn't match with them, and they didn't want anything to do with it. And that centralization of what that team had been doing suddenly created a big struggle again. So I finally moved to the UK, where I am now, and I got an amazing opportunity to work at Ocado Technology, and I was there for about 4 years. And I was given the ability to take it and one step further, to grow my muscles and stretch my brain and bring in all those things that I thought we'd hit as boundaries. And I was able to do HR change. We did a lot of psychology. We did a lot. I actually had a behavioral psychologist in my team. And with a team of about 15 kind of specialists, we brought in many, many other pieces of the knowledge network that you'd meet in any conference that you went to around the world at the moment in the Agile movement. We changed leadership, we changed product thinking, we brought in CD3 for prioritization and service design and many, many things. And this was a fantastic time and we learned lots, but again, there was always these friction points. And in this case, it was right up at the C-level, where the C-level were wondering what was this technology group doing, even though it was like over 1,000 people as part of the Ocado company. They were really confused as to what was going on, and it was triggering them. It was activating all sorts of immune responses. So although we were having incredible success, we were also having incredible friction. So jumped along on this journey, and for the last couple of years since I left Ocado, I've been trying to figure out what I'd learned and really put it into a model. So the two key realizations for me were that actually this journey that we're on in the Agile movement, it's not about agility. And I think everyone here has figured that out already. It's very unlikely, unless you're very, very new to it, that you haven't heard the meme of it's not about doing Agile, it's about being Agile. And I think that being Agile journey is about creating great organizations. And if we're going to create great organizations, we can't just focus on practice and we can't just focus on technology. So we're going to have to take into account all of those elements of friction. So it's not about practices, it's about how leadership and systems align through our whole organization with the practices that we've been bringing in. And that has to be a fundamental part of any Agile transformation. So I was seeing a whole bunch of common dysfunctions. And I think they were dysfunctions of myself and of the leaders around me and of the Agile coaches around me and the Scrum Masters around me and all of the influencers, was that often we were picking things that we felt happy with. I'm just going to go through these kind of 4 key dysfunctions, but often we were picking things that we felt happy with, and particularly the leadership, the traditional leadership, the line managers, rather than things that were based upon good evidence as great ways to run a team, great ways to help individuals with their motivation, all the kinds of things that we're now seeing come out in many of the books that we read. Most of the managers weren't seeing the whole. They were very focused either as a Scrum Master on their very localized team or as a manager on only their department, but they weren't seeing the end-to-end scope of the whole system, and they were often focused on their silo. And we had a tendency not to revert to type and not deal with complexity and assume that the answer would be a simple one or one thing that we could find by doing a bunch of analysis. And you guys probably know that I'm hinting at Cynefin there, and I'll talk about that in a sec. And that was leading us to not targeting the highest value things that we could be doing. We were actually going where it was safest, and we were going where it was simple and where we could pick something that we'd met before, done one fix, and of course that fix was going to work every time, and not understanding that complexity. So So this is a rhetorical question. I'm assuming all of you out of there do know Cynefin. I'm not even going to do a poll on it. But the key learning here that I was sort of coming about was that we needed every leader to really understand that we were working in a complex environment when we were trying to create a great organization. We weren't trying to create agility. We were trying to create a great organization. And that involved an entire human organism, an ecology, if you want, an ecosystem. And we needed to make sure that we treated it as a complex domain and we adapted with it, and that we didn't predict that we could always know the answer. And we needed that learning mentality. And often this was very, very hard for all of our leaders. And they were having effectively a Cynefin fail, and that they were seeing this ball of rubber bands and they were seeing that bright pink stripe across the middle, and they're going, I know I can straighten that stripe and that'll solve everything. And they were almost letting all of the other rubber bands there disappear into the background and not really realizing that what was hidden underneath was this kind of network diagram on the right. And as they straightened one journey across that network, they were actually breaking other journeys. When we optimized just the product flow, then we could break finance, that we could break HR, or that when we optimized HR, we would break other things, or optimize sales, we'd break it. And this was the key finding, that we now needed to bring everything into the mix to actually have a real transformation to a great organization. And there's a natural human behavior that makes us think this way, and that is we are a categorization engine. And I don't know how many of you have read this book by Robert Sapolsky, but I highly recommend it. And he talks about all of the biology and all of our conditioning in these amazing engines that we run, which makes us want to categorize everything and try and turn everything into an analyzed, deterministic, simple style of Cynefin thing. And actually, when any action we take could be influenced by neuroscience, by our hormones, by our psychology, by our culture, by the incentives or the system or processes around us, or even the trust in the person who's bringing the idea to us. And if we don't take that into account as leaders, then we're failing. And I think even as influencers in the Agile movement, we often get very, very focused on, I've got one method, it's going to work, we don't need to worry about all of the other impacts, and that's a fail. So what I felt I needed to do was to help every leader I bumped into understand the totality of what I learned in all of these different elements that we'd come across at any Agile movement conference. And I decided I'd try and catalog the whole domain to help other people make sense of what was there. And I would look for what was actually evidence-based and that we could give to the leaders so that we could help them see the whole. And I really wanted to kind of make sure that there was research behind the things that we were picking as well. So I started mapping things, and this is a subset, about 50% of the things that I mapped on the right here. But I wanted to be also a bit picky as I started to map all these things together and make sure that they were evidentially based. And when I say evidence, there's either primary evidence like scientific proof, or there's enough case buildup of evidence that we can really believe in something. And for me, if we've only got one organization having success with something, this is not enough case evidence to justify that as a change. And I wanted to be able to pass that knowledge on. And so I constructed this data lake that hopefully I could go to each manager and go, hey, look, what do you need to know? I can take you to the place and we can get that information for you. What are you having problems with? Let's pick a book. Let's pick a research article or a YouTube video even, and help them on that journey. But what turned out to happen was, when I was using this at Ocado and at the bank, was that actually most of the managers, it scared them off. It was actually just too much information, and actually that just made them feel probably even smaller and even more or less confident in their knowledge, and made them a bit fearful of what the Agile movement and what myself and my coaching team were bringing to them. So I realized I had to change tactic, and I actually had to synthesize all of that information down and try and construct a bit more of a classic let's say, consultancy 2x2 kind of model. But I really wanted to create a model that I felt was really valid and was still based upon what was evidential within inside all of the data that I'd collected, and take out the noise. So I came up with a thought model. It's the things I think we should be teaching to our leadership. It's the things that I think we need to emphasize as an agile movement, but as a making great organizations movement, which is what I truly believe we are, making extraordinary organizations, I hope. And I totally admit that all models are wrong and some are useful, and I really hope that this one is useful, and it will show up some more things that we should be passing on to the leaders we interact with, or take on ourselves if there's anything that you spot that may be missing from the things you've been looking at, to take, put into your kind of bag of tricks in your toolbox. So the thought model looks like this. It starts with, if we want an extraordinary organization and it knows what it wants, it's got commitments to customers, it's got a purpose, it's got a vision, then I was looking at all of that data and going, what are the core things that are showing up in the model? And what I found was that there were three key pillars. One was we had to pick the right team. We actually had to create the right team. We had to create the right structure for it. We had the right leadership for it, the right HR processes. We had to pick the right team members with the right behaviors and the right values that we wanted. And all of this was like essential if we were going to do anything else. If we had the wrong team, then we were often going to have a really poor result on our journey to a great organization. And I could zoom into a particular piece of the data lake, and I could easily find stuff on creating great teams and the psychology and the leadership we needed. And there's books there like Thinking Fast and Slow. There's Black Box Thinking. There's Predictably Irrational. There's the Drive book by Dan Pink. And so there's huge amounts of fantastic researched, evidenced literature out there on how we should do that. But actually, most of the leaders I bounced into really hadn't read these books and really didn't understand the content that well and weren't applying them in their transformations. And we could look at another piece of the data lake, and we could really easily get hold of great literature on how to design our organization. We've got Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge and Reinventing Organizations by Frederick Laloux, and Mary Poppendike's work, and the list goes on. And there's great information here. And yet again, if I put that list of books in front of any of our standard line management leaders, most of them had never seen these books, whereas I'm pretty sure that most of the influencing leaders out there will have at least seen a bunch of these, and I've only got about a fraction of them there, but these are some of my favorites. And if you haven't seen them, then you should probably look some of these up. So the second pillar that I found was highlighting itself out of the data lake was we had to build the right thing. And Agile's had this meme forever, build the right thing and build it right. Well, building the right thing is the product and the service that we're going to deliver with our organization. And we have to make sure that we're doing the right thing. And so this was a clear area of knowledge that leaders needed to make sure that their teams were actually connected to the customer and understanding the priority and what we were building and why we were building it. And there's heaps of fantastic books in this area, Lean Startup or Principles of Product Development Flow, or Creativity Inc. inspired. There are oodles of books in this area, but it was a key pillar. And the third key pillar, there's only three, is now that we've got a fantastic team, and we've picked a fantastic product and service and we're evolving it cleverly with our customer, then we can worry about how efficient we are at it, and we can worry about the quality of it in terms of how much failure demand we're having with our process to put things out, and how good our lead time is, and how do we estimate what we can deliver in the next 2 weeks, and all of those kinds of pieces. And again, we could see sections of the data lake, whether it's Phoenix Project or Accelerate, I haven't got that on there in this particular, or Lean Software Development, Clean Code, which are ways to optimize the way in which we do things in the software movement or in any movement, and they're all about the efficiency of the organization. So now we've got our three kind of core columns, and we have to have all of those right to have a fantastic, extraordinary organization. but there seemed to be other things that there was covered in this data lake in the literature, and these are what I call the three levers, and they were, and by drawing rings around sections of the data lake, it was obvious that they were cross-cutting almost all of these topics. And number one was actually the leadership. We had to make sure that each of these three aspects had clear leadership. And the leadership had to be creating clear systems and actually documenting them and making them and communicating them out across the organization. But there had to be clear policy and structure in the organization for people to understand what expectations there were and not necessarily have their leader be the source of all knowledge. And finally, lastly, we had all of the practices, all of the micro ways that a team could optimize itself, hopefully they're self-organizing teams, to achieve better results in any of these categories. And those we could allow almost to evolve in their own way if the system and the constraints and the clarity of the direction, the vision of the organization from the leadership was clear. And so this became the synthesis layer. And yep, sorry, I put that on the right-hand side. But there, and we found that the intersection of these three different levers and these three pillars gave us 9 different dynamics to look at. And having those 9 dynamics meant we could have a chat with a leader and we could talk about which elements in their team, and because it works on a local team, or which elements at a CEO level were not operating that well, or where did we have weaknesses and strengths inside an organization. And it was much more manageable than just looking at the crazy wire work to the left there and going, oh gosh, where should we go now? So we needed some more repeatable detail under that. And so I started trying to catalog all of the questions and all the things that we would want in the 9 boxes. And I'm not going to go into great detail, but just so that you know that there is a whole bunch of detailed items to look for in each of the 9 boxes. And then we could start asking about those different things across an organization, and we could use it for some diagnostic purposes with our leadership. And then we could optimize the way we as agile transformation people took agile to people. We could say, actually, let's look for where this organization is weakest and let's evolve in the places where it's weakest. And so this is a very early attempt where what we did is we went out and asked all of the questions in each of the boxes, and we did a bit of sense making, if you will, a bit like cognitive edge style, but the Dave Snowden work. And we asked, where is all the pain points that you're suffering as staff? And we went across all the staff and said, what's going wrong for you? Where could we do more? What could we improve? And almost everyone in this particular organization clearly said, stuff's not going right in the left-hand column. Our human dynamics, our people, our culture, and our organizational structure is not working for us. But actually, we're building the right thing and we're building it right. We're actually doing the efficiency and effectiveness bits correctly, but left-hand side, not so great. And some trends were appearing as I did this at more and more organizations. And that was leadership was avoiding and not creating systems. So the middle layer was not getting, we often saw a whole bunch of problems across the middle layer where the leadership was there and there was a whole bunch of people wanting to know exactly how they should operate, but they hadn't set up policies and constraints within the organization that were clear to people. And so people felt like they were in a vacuum and they didn't know what was going on because the middle systems layer was missing. And the other one was the one that I showed you on the previous slide, which is where leaders were avoiding building good human dynamics. They were avoiding the left column. And I wasn't quite sure exactly why that was, but I thought it was just lack of knowledge and a bit of fear that those things were complex and they'd like everything to be simple. So I figured that I now needed to get a message to these leaders that actually the left-hand column was really important and that the system layer was really important, and explain the prioritization in the model. And these kind of 2 core patterns kind of threw themselves out of the data lake at me, and were very obvious. And that was the leadership creates the systems within the organization. The HR system doesn't just appear magically out of nowhere and self-evolve. The CEO or the head of HR or the CFO sets up those systems and sanctions the way that those systems act. And the same with our prioritization for our product. So the systems are created by the leadership, and then the systems within those constraints of those systems, that's where practices evolve. So it definitely had to happen in this order. Leadership came before systems, before practices. There was no point putting in practices if they were going to create friction with systems or friction with leadership. They were always going to get overpowered. And secondly, that the right team had to be there to create the right products and services, to create the right, and then we would worry about efficiency. There was no point building a beautifully efficient, high quality thing that no one wanted in the product category. So these things were the power order or the priority order in which we needed to care about a dysfunction inside our organization. And that gave us this kind of prioritization where we wanted to worry about the top left-hand dynamic box, where leadership and organizational culture intersected way more than we wanted to worry about where efficiency and practices intersected. And we needed to make sure that our leaders, both influencers like yourselves or line managers like I was, understood where the friction would occur and why we had created maybe two competing things that were going to create friction. So, and that gives us vaguely a priority sort of like radiating out from the 1-1 box. And that is the leadership and organization was first, and then it spreads out from there, and the product and systems around it were going to be more important than the surrounding blue boxes that we have on that diagram. And so this should allow us places to decide on places to focus. So I've deliberately left the words here, hopefully almost unreadable. This was actually the analysis of an organization last year. And you can see that given green was good and red was bad, that this organization wasn't functioning very well as a highly effective digital transformation or agile transformation kind of organization. But you can see that their most powerful point very quickly in the heat map is the bottom right, and that their efficiency of their practices has had the most focus, but actually the red is over in the systems for people and product, or in the leadership for building it right. So we could then have a discussion with that organization of, actually, look, things aren't going well, but we can now pick very cleverly where you want to invest your money and where do you want to invest in change. And so let's map some of those potential interventions or changes. And I thought, just to be a little bit more provocative, if you will, let's map where story points is. And story points for me is a bit like cats on the internet. In the Agile movement, estimation and story points seems to be half of the Agile movement discussion on the internet. And yet, for me, it's an incredibly low priority thing to be talking about, because it's an efficiency practice. It's not optimizing our organizational structure or our leadership. It's not optimizing our systems. It's not optimizing which product we build. It's actually just about how much we commit to in an iteration, and hopefully making it more our product delivery a bit more predictable. But this is the lowest corner box. And yet we spend an inordinate amount of time on interventions as coaches helping teams with story points. And I think that this is the wrong conversation. This is a dysfunctional place to be. Test automation, another very, very popular topic on the internet and in the DevOps community and all the CI/CD. But all that CI/CD and test automation work is, again, efficiency practice. And if it's going to rub up against organizational structures or systems or product systems that are going to collide with it, it's going to lose that power battle, and we're going to create huge friction inside our organization. And we need to make sure that our leadership and systems are aligned first. Let's map something in a more powerful position for a moment. So if we map sales incentives, and this is a classic dysfunction that I see in many organizations when we're looking at a macro see the whole perspective, is if we have sales incentives, which is now the orange priority box, it's an organizational system in that it's a constraint or a system that's applying across a large group of people, and it's focused on the people and the way they act for their own personal salary and bonusing and journey in the organization. It might even determine their career. If they are being incentivized to focus on getting sales to customers, and those customers are saying, I want X, and the UR or the user research or UX people are saying, we don't think they want X, we think they want Y, which one's going to win? Well, you're going to create huge friction, and the sales guys are probably going to win because they are more empowered and more powerfully motivated to focus on their system and delivering to that. And they're going to ignore the user research and the UX if ever they can, because their incentive system might be wrong. And often we see sales incentives that are focused on deliver more. And if we're trying to deliver more, then that's going to collide with, say, a team that's focusing on its efficiency and its practices of limiting WIP. And so suddenly, if the sales guys are trying desperately to sell more and more and more and more, then we could end up with a friction between those two systems. And again, the sales incentives are going to win, or we're going to end up with the chief marketing officer having an argument with the CTO, and I'll bet you the chief marketing officer is going to win. And we're very unlikely to, however, go and change the actual sales incentive program, which is what we should be doing as leaders. And OKRs is another classic. It often collides with our weighted shortest job first or our CD3 for determining priority. And if someone's got personal OKRs that are different from the priority order of stories or epics for a team to build, then I personally think that they're more likely to feel conflicted and unhappy, and there's going to create friction, and they're going to plump for, well, actually, I might just skip in the thing that I need for my OKR rather than the thing that's needed for the team product. So we're continually getting into these kind of collisions. And I just thought, for a quick thought, bit of leadership, we'd just say, where is Scrum cover in these 9 dynamics? And for me, Scrum is very focused on low priority areas. It's very focused on the practices near the bottom, if we're just taking the key elements out of the Scrum guide. And recently, we've just added values to the Scrum guide, and so now it's got a little bit of the practice and maybe even the system for organization and culture, but it's very, very late coming. And so Scrum has not been helping us get the right information into our leadership at the top and making sure that there isn't friction in the system enough for me. So I've hammered this home, but I believe that this priority order and getting our managers to understand where we intervene and what we do is really, really important. And organizations are tending to focus on efficiency and practice because they're easy to work with, they're quick to measure, and they're often very mechanical. But by changing those, often the transformation doesn't last, just like the transformations I went through in my early days. Whereas the organization should be focusing on the leadership change and the organizational structure change, which would have an enabling factor in that it's very powerful and it will flow through the organization very, very quickly. But leaders are often resisting this work because it takes a lot of time, it's really hard, and it's actually really scary for many people. So under the guise of this, I was wanting to try and help leaders on this journey, but they were all kind of avoiding it. And I was going, why? So there were some more leadership dysfunctions I needed to tackle in the model and help them on the journey with. And that was, many of them were still trying to be an individual contributor and not trying to be a leader. They were trying to be the expert still. They'd often spent 10 years becoming the expert in data science, or the expert in software development or architecture, or the expert in UX or product. And they were now avoiding understanding their function as someone who was there to influence a community in the organization. And they were therefore focusing on adjusting practices and avoiding focusing on themselves and their actions and how they were affecting the organization. So I wondered what I could, what these leaders should be doing, and whether I could get that message through to them. And basically, it's how can, if our leaders are going to be highly effective across the 3 pillars of the organization, then their job is now to create an extraordinary community. Their job is now to make sure that the organizational priority and customer needs are really clear to that community, and to optimize the structure and the flow across that whole community for efficiency and quality. And this new role, I believe, is a whole new career, and we need to stop calling it management, and we need to start describing it as organizational engineers. And that's exactly what we did when I was at Ocado Technology, is that we changed our professional development system so that all managers, which was about 130 managers at the time, were changed so that their career path was organizational engineers, and their responsibility was to be amazing at doing these 3 things in these 3 pillars correctly. And we also renamed the career path for Agile coaches and Scrum Masters and some other influencing leaders to be organizational engineers, because actually, whether or not we were performing a specialist function as a line manager or a specialist function as an expert in coaching, we were organizational engineers, and we needed to see the whole, and we needed to make sure we were acting across all of these 3 pillars rather than just focusing on practice or efficiency. And therefore, as organizational engineers, it's now our responsibility to see this entire data lake, to learn about this entire data lake, and to design our organization to take advantage of this entire data lake. Otherwise, we're not doing our job as organizational engineers correctly. We're not doing our job as leaders correctly. So I just threw in the slide of a few things that really stick out, but it's clear there is so much information in each of these buckets now, whether it's the book drive or the work by Lalou or Hackman or Senge or Sheen. There's oodles in every one of these spaces to help us take to our leaders and help them on that learning journey. But it's going to be a tough order, because these people have spent many, many, many years in this place. And now we're telling them, actually, you're not the expert in product or the expert in development, because you're now leading cross-functional teams. And I'm sorry, but if you're a CEO or a CMO or someone at the C-level of an organization, you are leading a massive cross-functional team, and you need to understand how all the parts are interfacing with each other. So it's kind of a rhetorical question rather than a poll here, but I'm afraid that although I know a few leaders doing this, I know very few. It's a very small percentage. And I'm kind of asking, this is a call for all of you out there as either influencers or line managers to start taking on the responsibility as an organizational engineer of extending your knowledge and learning about all of these pillars, and not just focusing on one layer in the system, one dynamic. And so some ideas on how we can do this, and we again did these things in my 4 years at Ocado, and also recently with a few other organizations that I've been helping out. And the key learnings were, we needed to make sure that every manager in an organization, every manager if we can, understands that organizational engineering is a clear career path, and is the career path that they have now chosen to be on by being a manager. And so we had to define what the syllabus was for that. We had to define how you were assessed against that. You were no longer being assessed against delivery of projects. You were assessed on the high functioning elements of those 3 columns. We had to make sure that the individual contributor role, however, was highly valued and attractive to people who didn't want to be on that organizational engineering career path. So in Ocado, we had to make sure that individual contributors, our best developers, our best data scientists, our best testers, our best product people, could stay as an individual contributor and get promoted and be valued in the organization and be as senior as some of the line managers or high-end organizational engineers. And therefore we had to make stepping down from a management position to a individual contributor role a possibility, and we had to make sure that that wasn't seen as a negative thing, that we see that was a positive thing in saying, actually, what I really love is development. What I really love is data science. I should go there and I should be the best data scientist I can possibly be. And we could help those people. And that meant that the ones that did commit to the organizational engineering career path, we also needed to train. And it's not a 3-week course. Many of them had done a degree in software engineering or in statistics or in some other, or in marketing, and then had 5, 10, 15 years of knowledge as an expert in that area. And now we needed them to go on another multi-year learning journey to learn psychology and sociology and anthropology and flow efficiency and all the books in the data lake things that I was talking about. And so that means as agile coaches or as agile transformation or digital transformation experts or whatever kind of vein of influencing leader you are, as a supporting coach or leader, you need to understand that scope and be able to help our managers go on that journey. And then I hope we won't have such sucky leadership. So as a kind of final statement before Q&A, I believe that if we want extraordinary organizations, we've got to take our leadership on an organizational engineering journey, or we will only watch more organizations fail to deliver real transformation or real evolution because we will create friction in our organizations. And thank you.